Okay, I had one more factor about the just basics of colonial New England religion. So the covenant is a term, I know we referenced it with the Pilgrims, but covenant is really a term used both with the Pilgrims and the Puritans. It is their kind of contract binding the settlers of New England to obey God. It's what Winthrop's going to really use to push ultimate obedience to the church on the colonists and making the church the central focal point of the colony as a whole. Again, even participation in civic life requires participation in the church. To simply vote, you have to have church membership. So, it's going to be something that really the Puritans especially use as a reason for obeying God, because they believe they have this covenant with Him to obey, forcing them, binding their hands, if you will. The colonists in this region are kind of like considered super Protestants. Like, they're willing to challenge established belief systems, and they are eager to declare, their own faith patterns and their own beliefs. So they are very proactive about sharing those ideologies. I want to quickly get into the settlement of two more colonies, which are very short and sweet compared to the previous two we just went over, and then we'll be done for this screencast. The first one is New York. So just kind of recall for a second that New York had been part of the Netherlands, okay? It was part of New Netherland. So it was just the region of like present-day New York was controlled by the Dutch. So the Dutch were the original group to colonize this area, and they didn't have many settlers coming from the Netherlands, so eventually they basically began opening the colony up to anyone that wanted to come and settle, could come and settle. So you have kind of this interesting culture in the New Netherland area, because it's not only Dutch settlers, there are some British settlers and even some French, some natives, because they're doing business with the natives, okay? Although the natives aren't considered to be welcomed to come because they feel like it's their land, but that's another story. Anyway, so there is some time where there's trade happening, peaceful negotiation, between the English and the Dutch merchants, like living in that same area where they're kind of cooperating. But again, the Netherlands were always kind of weak with their New World holdings because they didn't have that many personal settlers there. So eventually England is going to win New Netherland, including the city of New Amsterdam, which is like New York City, from the Dutch without a fight. It will become known as New York, named after James, the Duke of York, who was the brother of the king at the time of England, King Charles II. James himself will be the future king of England. But that's where the name comes from. So now this is officially British territory, but there's still some Dutch settlers living in the area. Just because it's now British territory and now it's officially known as New York doesn't mean that it will be all British settlers. They will still have Dutch influence, and overall it will still resemble Dutch society for some time. And the last colony that we're going to talk about today is Pennsylvania. Charles II, that king I just mentioned in the last bullet, he's going to give William Penn, who is a British nobleman, the territory that would make up the colony of present-day Pennsylvania. He gives this to William Penn because he owed William Penn's father a good bit of money. So he's in debt to Penn's father. He can't afford to pay him cash, so he gives him so many square miles of land. This is where the name Pennsylvania comes from, being named after William Penn. Now, Penn was a Quaker, and so he is going to make Pennsylvania a refuge for other Quakers. Quakers were pacifists who were often persecuted back home in England because as pacifists they would not serve in the army, and they also did not pay taxes to the Church of England. They are very simplistic in their life as well as their methods of worship. So that's just a little side note about them. And they are also persecuted, like regionally, like the Puritans in Massachusetts Bay do not like them at all because of their different beliefs. In fact, Quakers are actually, they consider themselves members of the Society of Friends. It's their enemies who initially started calling them Quakers because they quaked when they encountered God, was the belief. So anyway, Penn himself, he is going to encourage peace with other colonies. He allows for other religious beliefs to be practiced here. He's not closed-minded in that way like the Puritans. The Quakers are generally a very peaceful people. And if he looks familiar, yes, he is the man who is the Quaker oatmeal guy. All right, so please write down any questions you have about this. We're going to do a primary source assignment on Pennsylvania in class on Friday, and I will see y'all tomorrow. Please write down, like I said, any questions you have.